Manager of the Attawapiskat First Nation is facing fraud and theft charges, but we've got a couple of experts in on all the situations up there. Chris Schaefer joining us, legal contributor now. Nice, well done. Welcome to Sun News. Great
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be part of the team.
Laurie Goldstein here as well, Sun News contributor as well. Let's start with the legal side of things, because what is being alleged here?
Basically, you've got fraud, and when you look at fraud under the criminal code, it's basically a prohibited act of deceit, and that prohibited act must relate to sort of loss of property or money or service, a valuable service. That's what we're looking at here, basically fraud.
And the theft as well, is that part of the different charge? Or?
Different charge, those are the two charges, fraud being the more important one.
How serious are these things? I mean, a theft over $5,000, is this jail time? Fraud, is it jail time? Basically,
my understanding is that they're proceeding by way of an indictable offense, and that basically, just to make it very easy to understand, is a more serious offense. It allows for longer prison terms and fines of $5,000 or higher.
Long time coming, and this is Clayton Kennedy that's being accused of that, right? Laurie, Clayton's background was...
No, he's the co-manager of the, this is Attawapiskat, this is Theresa Spence. He was also a partner of Chief Spence. This is, if you look just more generally, there was an audit by Deloitte, I think, on this reserve, and they found out of $100 million of federal money that had gone, a lot of it was not documented. There wasn't documentation. Things like, $300,000 for a consultant, but no documentation about what that meant. I think what this does show, and I know he's presumed innocent, and he's entitled to his day in court. Having said that, I think the laying of charges, Ezra Levant from Sun News Network wrote about a lot of this stuff when it was unpopular to do so. And I think what this shows is that there was a reason for concern in this reserve. Having said that, I don't think this is a great victory. This is one individual in one place. He had a history. He declared bankruptcy in the early 2000s. Was this the best person to do that job? I don't know. And on charges, I leave that to the courts.
You're suggesting then it may just fall on this one person as opposed to the community, or tie back to...
Yeah, what I'm saying is I'm just more concerned about the fact that we have a reserve system that's a disaster. And I don't just blame Native leaders for that. There are reserves that run very well. I blame the federal government. This guy was appointed, this individual was appointed by the federal government and the band together. So let's not just attack the band. And the second thing is, when I look at the billions of dollars we're spending, we can't get clean water to these reserves. People are living in poverty. And this reserve, it was the whole housing crisis that caused the thing. And to me, those are bigger questions. And those just aren't a few, putting aside from this one. This isn't just about a few managers who aren't doing their jobs. There's a systemic problem that we need to deal with, and this isn't going to solve it. I think the people who do wrong should be dealt with, but we've got so much bigger things to worry about.
Yeah, I agree with all that, except that I wonder if... Oh, sorry,
I was just going to say, Laurie, I think you're right. There's a systemic issue, but in fairness to the federal government here, that reserve or nation is under co-management. So the feds have already looked at the situation and said, hey, with respect to the oversight of financial matters on that particular First Nation reserve, there are some issues of concern. So they're already in a co-management relationship where instead of the First Nation having complete control over the finances and bookkeeping and auditing and what have you, the federal government stepped in and said, we're going to sort of play a halfway house here. We're going to be involved. We're not going to exclusively take it over from the First Nation, but we're going to be involved because there's some concerns here.
Okay, but traditionally it's an agreement between the federal government as well as the band, and then the band actually pays the salary of whoever the co-manager is. But I'm wondering, as opposed to what Laurie's saying, if this is a foot in the door. These charges come and all of a sudden it highlights the financial mismanagement. Do you think that could happen? And will we see it at other reserves?
Well, the interesting thing is once you get into court, a lot of this stuff becomes public information. Reporters, Sun News Network, other news agencies can seek access to that information. A lot of it then becomes public, and that's when you start to get some really interesting stories about what exactly went on with the finances on this particular reserve, and are there larger systemic issues? Will this then shine the light on other First Nations and maybe cause the federal government to take a look at those
one
issues
specific
more closely?
Issue this gentleman is now the co-manager of another reserve. So
I was seeing that.
Of course there would be questions raised about that.
Cochrane, Ontario, Tagamu.
Interesting, under the criminal code, the same section, it allows for the court to issue a prohibition order. So this, if he's charged, convicted, we don't know if he'll be convicted, but if he is convicted or if he gets probation under discharge by the court, there is a possibility of the court to issue a prohibition order that prevents him from continuing in the employment related to money or property, or the oversight of money or property, or actually ever seeking that employment. So there is some concerns here for his potential job.
Oh, except that it's one guy, right? I wonder if in the course of plea bargaining, and I don't know the answer to this, but in the course of plea bargaining, will more be exposed, other than the trial itself, will more be exposed, and will he roll over on other people that might have done more egregious crimes?
It's hard to say what might happen on cross-examination, what this particular individual might say under oath. I can't predict that, but when you're dealing with law and litigation, especially charges, it's very fact-specific. So I would be surprised if it got beyond the confines of the situation with respect to this particular individual.
One natural question I know our readers are already asking is, well, he was the partner of Chief Spence. Chief Spence is a very controversial individual. Having said that, we have to be fair. There's been no charges against Chief Theresa Spence. Whether there are or there aren't in future, that's one thing. But it is a question people would ask themselves.
Sure.
I think.
And then they charge the partner at the time and says, okay, how deep does it go? They deal with the partner on a plea bargain basis to find out whether there were other abuses. Isn't that exactly what?
And the only thing saying that it's not a matter of saying that Chief Spence is entitled to the presumption of innocence. She hasn't been charged with anything. So it's a question. It's in people's minds, but I think we have to be careful here. I totally agree with you. Once you get, and this is one of my concerns, once you get into criminal court, we're talking about proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's a different standard. It's a different standard from a civil court, where it's balance of probabilities. So this is a very narrow thing. It could have some. I certainly agree. I don't criticize the laying of charges. Anyone should be charged if there's reasonable grounds to believe they committed a crime. But we're dealing with a very specific thing, and what we're talking about in terms of, to me, we're spending billions of dollars a year on reserves. Indians are not being well served by it. The Canadian taxpayers are not being well served by it. Something's wrong, and I think you have to look at the federal government for those solutions.
In terms of the structure of these co-managers?
Well, let's talk about a whole bunch of things. Let's talk about the legal cigarettes smuggling on the reserves. In the course of my career, I've talked to law-abiding natives on reserves who are terrified because basically organized crime runs the reserve, and the government and police forces turn a blind eye to it because they're scared of enacting federal power on a reserve. Those kinds of things. Walkerton in Ontario, we had 8 people die from tainted water in Walkerton. There's tainted water orders every day on reserves, and there's also like people are sick. And we're spending billions of dollars. How can this be happening? It can't just be a few corrupt Aboriginals. It's got to be an Indian affairs bureaucracy in Ottawa that isn't doing its job. And that's where solutions have to come from. That's my concern.
Okay. Well, we'll obviously track this story. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Chris Schaefer, Mark Goldstein. Quick break.